Good morning, FCC family. Today's coffee brought to you by House Gryffindor. I'm a Hufflepuff, but that's fine. Thank you so much for everybody that came out last night and was involved in Youth Group Live. That was pretty fun, but I want to make it even better next week. So hit me up if you have ideas of how we can be more interactive, how we can create a better space for you to meet with each other and meet with God. Whatever ideas you have, let me know. I'm really open. But thank you for coming out to that. Also, if you have videos that you want to post on Instagram or photos, it'd be super interesting to see how you guys are living life. Send them my way. I'll post them for you, whether it's a video of how you're living your day, a picture, an encouragement, whatever it is. This is a space for you all to interact. So shoot it my way and I will put it up for you. In the meantime, we are still walking through the book of Mark, my favorite gospel. And it just so happens, y'all, that today we're on Mark chapter 5, one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible. This whole thing, one of my favorite chapters. It has the Gerasene demoniac in it, which I've talked to death. I love that story so much. You can read it. In fact, right now, pause this, read Mark chapter 5, and then hit play to see what I'm going to be talking about. Afterwards, I want to hear what you found interesting. So this starts in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And this is how it goes, y'all. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd, per usual Jesus, gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. There's a lot of falling at Jesus' feet in chapter 5. He pleaded earnestly with him. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. Now pause for a second, because sometimes we do what I call the Bible breeze. That means we read something and without really actually letting it soak into who we are. This man is in a situation where his daughter, his young daughter, is dying. As a mom, that is heart-wrenching to imagine. A hopelessness that you would feel if no doctors can do anything. And so you go to Jesus, who you've heard things about, in the hope that Jesus will be able to save her. And once again, Jesus has compassion and Jesus goes with this desperate man. It continues. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. So Jesus goes and everybody else is like, whoop, okay. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. She was broke too. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered. "And yet you can ask, 'Who touched my clothes?'" They're like, "You're being ridiculous. Everybody touched your clothes." But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the truth. Now, why would she be trembling with fear? Well, you see, back then, to bleed was to be unclean. To be unclean meant you couldn't meet with God. This was a punishable offense. So women, when they were bleeding, had to be removed from society. They had to stay inside, or they had to go through these ceremonial washings. Like, it was this crazy experience. And if you defied that, if you didn't tell people that you were experiencing that and you entered into a crowd like that, she could have been punished by death. She could have been killed. So when Jesus starts asking, you can imagine the fear welling up inside of her. She's about to be found out. And even though she's relieved from 12 years of horror, it might only be to die right there. Can you imagine how scary that would be? And how brave of her to fall at Jesus' feet and to admit it was her. I mean, how brave. But this is how Jesus responds in verse 34. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." I love that he calls her daughter. I love the feeling of that fear completely falling away at that word, daughter. My host daughter, Navia, one of my favorite things to call her is Yeputa in Korean, which just means my beautiful daughter. It's just such an endearing term to bring somebody into the fold, to say, you are mine. And Jesus says, you are mine. Don't worry. Go and finally be at peace. So this is in the end of the story. In verse 35, it says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus. Remember, he was on the way to save that little girl. The synagogue leader, your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? I have a pit in my stomach now just imagining what it would feel like to witness God perform a miracle for somebody else. And then to hear those words. How hopeless he would feel. Overhearing what they had said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid. Just believe. He did not let anyone follow him. So this whole large crowd of people that had been with him this whole time, he dismisses them all except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion. That was one of my old students, Caleb Hayes. I'll call you back, Caleb. I love you. Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. I imagine this laugh wasn't like a hilarious laugh. It was like a disgusted laugh. Like, how dare you? You know, like, who do you think you are to mock what's happening here? But he puts them all out. He took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha koum, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the little girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. She was your age, middle schoolers. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. There you have it, one of my favorite stories from the book of Mark. I guess what I love so much about it, it's that it's a combination of faith and power. Jesus comments on the faith of these people. To the woman, he says, your faith has healed you. To the man, he says, don't be afraid, just believe. This is a message for us as well. When we are experiencing hurt and unbearable circumstances, things that just seem hopeless, totally gone, we have to listen to the voice of God saying, don't be afraid. Just believe. Because if our God has the power to stop a 12-year disease, if our God has the power to dispel a legion of demons from a man by a lake, if our God has the power to bring a little girl back to life, then our God has the power to do all things. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Now, this isn't a message of when you believe you get what you want. I wish that was the case, but it's just not the case. We talked about last night in one of our Instagram lives that sin entered the world and the world is broken. But we gain so much when we lean into God and out of fear. When we have hope in the power of God to do all things and lean away from the anxiety that we feel in being isolated. So I guess my challenge this morning for all of us is don't be afraid, y'all. Just believe. And let's see what God is capable of during this season. I love you. Send me your videos. Send me your comments. What's interesting to you? And in the meantime, wash those hands. Stay away from each other. Peace and love.